We teach people to live by a guiding question. We say it's just simple to ask, what does love require of me in this situation?
Thanks for joining us here on the Faith Ignited channel. I'm Michael Bridges, Executive Pastor at Faith Ignited. I am with
Aaron Shivington.
the one and only Aaron Shivington, our pastor at Faith Ignited at Fairborn and Xenia. And first, I hope you'll join us at one of our services. We really enjoy worshiping together on Sunday in Fairborn and in Xenia. And we're ready to get started here with our Q&A, Aaron.
And since you mentioned the service, we probably should say that, you know, a lot of times we do Q&A at the end of our service as well. So
we do.
If you have a question and you want to see it done live, you can show up at church and ask it as well.
Yeah. Aaron, I'm just studying scholasticism in the 14th, 15th century, and that was a major change that education made, was it went to questions and answers from students instead of just preaching, and that's something that Faith Ignited does.
Okay.
So Q&As, and here we are. Someone has submitted this excellent question, Aaron. They wrote, the story of the woman being stoned in John chapter 8 has a note in my Bible that says the story might not be true. Why is it in the Bible? P.S. This person writes, it is one of my favorite stories, so I'm sad that it might not be real or true.
Yeah. So first of all, if you aren't familiar with the story out of John 8, what you see is you have the story that it really is one of the most beloved stories that people love to tell it. I love to tell it. This woman's caught in adultery. She's brought in front of Jesus. The Pharisees are setting a trap where Jesus, the law of Moses says this woman should be stoned. Under the Roman rule, the Jews don't have the jurisdiction to actually stone her. So once again, Jesus is caught between obeying the law of Moses, obeying the law of Rome. Although in that culture, they probably could have stoned her and gotten away with it. No big deal, moved it off to the side. And I always love to remind people, isn't it interesting that just the woman's brought? Like, in order for it to be adultery, somebody else should be there and that person's missing as well. And so it's a trap for Jesus. And then, of course, we have this moment where they ask Jesus, and you have this mob mentality going on. They're all excited. They've all got their rocks ready to go. And instead of directly answering, Jesus bends down and starts writing in the sand. It is interesting that the same verb in the Greek that's used as Jesus writing in the sand is the same verb that's used in the Greek Septuagint to describe God writing the Ten Commandments with his finger. And so you have a little motion between the story in Exodus and the story in John. And then, of course, Jesus stands up and gives the famous saying that even if you haven't read the Bible, you've probably heard, let the person who is without sin throw the first stone. And the men drop their stones and leave one by one. And then you have the powerful moment where the only person who could still stone her, who is without sin,
is Jesus.
Says to her, I forgive you, go and sin no more. And so there's this powerful healing in the story. So there's a reason it's a beloved story. There's a reason that this person would find it something that would bring them comfort. It's brought me comfort often. And what I want to clear up immediately is she closes her question off by saying, I'm heartbroken to find that it might not be true. And what I would like to encourage her and anybody is to open their Bible, go to that passage in John, and notice that it doesn't say this story might not be true. The brackets that are around the story say it wasn't in the original manuscripts, not it might not be true. And so there needs to be a distinction there between, hey, just because it wasn't in the earliest manuscripts doesn't mean it might not be true.
Right.
So I want to start there.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna geek out a little bit. For those of you that really love kind of biblical textual criticism, you'll enjoy this part. For those of you that don't, just bear with us for a moment. All right. So the story probably is not in the original Gospel of John. Probably, I'm convinced like 99% that this wasn't located in the Gospel of John. And again, so are the textual critics. That's why they put the note there, so that everybody understands. Now, pause. That is how sacred the text is to the church. We don't think that it's in the original text, so we wanted you to know, right? Not we tried to hide it, not we tried to sneak something by you, but we pointed it out. And that's how reliable the text is. And so when someone says, hey, the Bible isn't reliable, this is actually one of the places I like to take them to, because I go, okay, this is not reliable. Look at how sneaky we are. We pointed out to you
And then tell you.
and told you in very plain sight, like, hey, we don't think this was in the original manuscripts. Not that it wasn't true, but it wasn't in the original manuscript. So again, for those of you who like textual criticism, which is a science that identifies, again, hey, did this person really write it? Is it consistent with their linguistic and writing style? That, hey, this is part of the original text because of the movement of the text. And let me just tell you why I don't believe from other scholars, their information, why this is part of the text. The story is missing from the Greek manuscripts of John before the 5th century. So until then, it's not really in the Gospel of John. Ironically, one of the first few places that we see it is at the end of the Gospel of Luke. And so it's inserted into Luke in some of the earlier manuscripts. It's at the end of Luke. All the earliest church fathers omit the passage, so the earliest church fathers who are writing commentaries and speaking about it, they don't speak at all about the passage directly.
They've omitted it.
They don't write about it, which then you got to go, hey, there's a lot of writings about pretty much the entire New Testament. Why didn't the early church fathers write about it? Well, because it wasn't in the original manuscripts. So the very earliest church fathers didn't have access to the written part of this story in the gospel. In fact, if you read the Gospel of John, the text itself flows really nicely from John 7:52 to John 8:12. And so if you leave out the story, the text actually flows better. It's almost like there's a small, like, hey, we're going to tell you a whole different story here, and then it comes back if you're reading the Gospel of John. The final thing I would say is no Eastern Church Father cites the passage before the 10th century. And so when you're dealing with the Gospels, you have this load of information that this isn't in the earliest manuscripts, probably wasn't even written by John, again, if you do the textual criticism and read the verbiage that's in there. Now, that being said, what I want to do is I want to quote Bruce Metzger here, because when you talk about Bible scholars and textual critics, this is kind of the godfather. This is the guy that, all right, let's go see in the last century who's the smartest guy on all this. And so what he says here is, the account has all the earmarks of historical veracity. There's little reason for doubting that the event here described actually occurred.
Say that again.
Yep.
There's little doubt.
There's little reason to doubt that the event described here actually occurred.
So he's saying it occurred.
He's saying that all the textual criticism says, yes, it's not part of the original Gospel of John, but there's really no reason to doubt that the event occurred, and he gives a load of evidence for that. And if you're interested, you can read that, The Gospel According to John, by Bruce Metzger, and again, he's written a lot on this just to help us bring clarity to this. So he says, hey, it's not in the original gospel. It was added in. That's why we bracketed it. But at the same time, the idea that it's not a true story is probably not a good argument either. It's a true story that has been added. We noted that it was added just because we protect the text and think it's that sacred. So he says, just anytime you're preaching on it, anytime you're leading a Bible study on it, it's important to just pause and go, remember, this isn't in the original gospel. John probably didn't even write this. But at the same time, it's a historical story. We can probably trust that this story is true. And it fits precisely with the character of Jesus. Again, it fits with all kind of the check marks of, is this historically reliable? It's kind of an embarrassing story for the church because you have this woman and they're brought to Jesus. And so you have this confrontation moment where if you were trying to slide a story into your Jewish audience, you've kind of made some of the leaders of the Jewish audience look bad. And so that doesn't work. It's a story about a woman, so it's got this earmarks that probably wouldn't have been made up. And so it has all these pieces that, again, Metzger goes, you can trust that this story is true. And it, again, most importantly, it fits with the character and nature of Jesus. He gives grace, at the same time says to the woman, go and sin no more.
Well, he gives mercy too.
Right.
You know, grace being getting something we don't deserve, and mercy not getting what we do deserve. You see both of those in this one story. It's a beautiful story here.
Right. So at the end of the day, I would say to the person who's asked the question here, don't be alarmed that it might not be true. There's very few biblical scholars in the entire world who go, this story is probably not true. However, it's probably not written by John, and was inserted into the Gospel of John, probably as a practice of liturgy by the early church, actually. We had this beautiful story. Again, one of the reasons why we still like it, the early church liked it. And as part of their liturgy practice, it fit within their liturgical calendar to insert it right there into the Gospel of John. And that's the most logical reason why it is where it is instead of floating somewhere else. So is it a historical story? Yes. Is it part of the Gospel of John? No. Can we read it and get to know Jesus and God better? Absolutely. So do we trust the story? Yep. Is it part of the Gospel of John? Probably not.
Aaron, the canonicity of the Bible, the statement that these are the words that are to be included or not included in the Bible, was done by men, but those men were equally as inspired to make the canon as were the writers of each of the books in the Bible themselves.
Right.
And the Holy Spirit led those many councils and groups of people who ultimately settled on the 66 books in the canon and the words in those books. Those were God inspired. I trust that inspiration.
Right.
So.
And to that point, I want to be very clear here. Again, there are people who try to use this to say, see, we can't trust the Bible. I think that if you're actually looking at this correctly, you actually go, no, this provides more reason to trust the historical accuracy and the sacredness of the canon text. Again,
Yes.
We didn't try to fool anybody. We said, hey, this wasn't in there. Let's put brackets around it. Let's put notes in our scripture. It says this isn't in the earliest manuscripts. That's how important this was. We didn't go back through. We didn't edit. We didn't clean up some variations. We left everything as it was. And still today, the manuscripts that you are reading can be dated back to within the 2nd and 1st century, and they are reliable.
Aaron, thanks. That's a great response. I appreciate that. And that explained a lot more about the authority and sufficiency and the canonicity of the Bible, the inspiration and those kind of, and the inerrancy, all in that one answer.
Yeah.
I appreciate that very much. So.
And there's so much more we could have talked about, but
Yeah.
I wanted to keep it short for the video.
Well, thanks for joining us today at Faith Ignited. Check us out on our website at faithignited.church. Also, check us out on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And best of all, join us on Sunday in Fairborn or Xenia at the Xenia YMCA for a service. Thanks, everyone.